What if the deadliest weapon in the Pacific was not a gun or a torpedo, but a circle of green light on a screen? 2 o'clock in the morning, November 13th, 1942. Rain lashes the deck of a Japanese destroyer. Commander Tamichi Hara grips the rail as shells tear the sea open around him. For 20 years, his navy ruled the darkness, trained to see what others could not. But tonight, the sea answers with invisible eyes. American shells arrive from nowhere, guided by something unseen, unimagined. The darkness that once sheltered him now betrays him. This is not a story of superstition or luck. It is the story of how science, built in secret laboratories and on factory floors thousands of miles away, changed the very meaning of war. As dawn rises over Iron Bottom Sound, one truth becomes clear. The Imperial Navy no longer owns the night. The age of radar has begun, and in the shadows of World War II, vision itself becomes the most powerful weapon of all. For nearly 4 decades, the Imperial Japanese Navy believed it had mastered the art of darkness. Its officers were trained not only to navigate through black seas, but to see through them, to measure distance by starlight, to strike unseen enemies with elegance and precision. From the Battle of Tsushima in 1905 to the Pacific campaigns of the early 1940s, Japan's naval doctrine worshipped the night as both shield and sword. Every recruit learned the rituals of darkness. They practiced for hours in lightless rooms to enhance night vision, memorized the scent of sea wind to gauge distance, and measured time by the rhythm of waves. Lookouts could distinguish a ship's silhouette 7,000 meters away on a moonless night, twice the range of any Allied sailor. To the Japanese command, that skill was not just training, it was proof of racial superiority, the ultimate validation that courage and discipline could outshine technology. When the Pacific War began, these lessons seemed unshakable. In the early months of World War II, Japanese cruisers and destroyers reigned supreme. At Savo Island, in August of 1942, they annihilated an Allied force in barely half an hour. 4 heavy cruisers sunk, thousands lost, not a single Japanese ship destroyed. The message was clear. America's machines were clumsy, blind, and unworthy of the night. Yet beneath the surface of that arrogance, a quiet storm was forming across the Pacific. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, inside an unmarked building known simply as the MIT Radiation Laboratory, a handful of engineers were turning invisible waves into weapons. They worked not with swords or ships, but with equations, wires, and something new. A British invention called the cavity magnetron. It could squeeze energy into a short, precise wavelength of 10 centimeters, enough to see objects miles away in total darkness. They called it the SG Surface Search Radar. It was small enough to fit on a destroyer and powerful enough to map an entire battle at night. Within 2 years, this single device would erase the very foundation of Japan's naval strategy. Meanwhile, on the decks of American shipyards, another army was forming. Women with rolled-up sleeves, African-American mechanics, and immigrant engineers worked side by side under the hum of fluorescent lights. They built the new eyes of the fleet, the radars, the antennas, the gun directors. To them, it was not science fiction. It was a job that might bring their sons home alive. Every turn of a wrench, every calibrated dial, was a promise whispered into steel. Back in Tokyo, the admirals laughed at the idea. They dismissed radar as an unproven toy, a distraction from the purity of naval skill. Why trust a glowing screen when you could trust a man's eyes? Why rely on electrons when you had the spirit of Bushido? But by the autumn of 1942, that pride began to crack. Reports trickled in from the Solomon Islands, strange accounts of American ships firing accurately through rain and fog, of destroyers striking from beyond visible range. Officers blamed luck, then propaganda, then fate. None dared admit that something deeper had changed. Commander Tamichi Hara, aboard the destroyer Amatsukaze, had spent his life preparing for such nights. He knew the rhythm of the waves, the timing of torpedoes, the gleam of a star shell. But in the early hours of November 13th, when he turned on his searchlight to find the enemy, the sea answered back with invisible precision. American shells rained down as if guided by ghosts. In seconds, his training, 2 decades of doctrine, dissolved in the white fire of radar-guided artillery. Across the ocean, on the decks of the USS Helena, sailors stared at a glowing circular screen. A blip appeared, then another. Within seconds, the gunners locked onto the target using coordinates fed from the Mark 37 computer. No one saw the enemy. They didn't need to. The radar saw for them. It was the first true clash between the human eye and the electronic eye, between faith and fact. As dawn broke over Iron Bottom Sound, the contrast could not have been sharper. One navy had built an empire on the myth of superior eyesight. The other had learned to see without eyes at all. Historians would later call it the moment the night changed sides. And in that moment, the old world of naval warfare, ruled by instinct, courage, and the naked eye, began to die. The transformation was not only tactical, it was cultural, even spiritual. For centuries, Japanese warriors believed that purity of spirit could overcome material disadvantage, that a man's resolve could defy physics. But radar cared nothing for courage. It saw through it. The cold circle of light on the American display was merciless, mathematical, and absolute. By the end of that night, one truth had emerged. The Imperial Navy no longer owned the dark. And the United States, through its factories, its scientists, and its ordinary workers, had just opened the eyes of an entire world. By late 1942, the Pacific Ocean had become a theater of ghosts. Ships moved through rain and smoke, unseen yet deadly. The Japanese Imperial Navy still trusted its eyes. The United States Navy had learned to trust its machines. In the black waters off Guadalcanal, the old and new worlds collided. On the night of November 12, 1942, Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force, tired, wounded, and outnumbered, sailed to intercept a Japanese bombardment fleet led by Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe. Among Callahan's cruisers was the USS Helena, her gunners guided not by searchlights, but by the whisper of electrons. At 01:24 hours, Helena's SG radar caught the first contact, enemy ships at 27,000 yards, far beyond the reach of human sight. For 20 minutes, the American operators tracked the approaching blips, their screens pulsing like heartbeats in the dark. Then came the command. Open fire. No star shells, no lights, no warnings. The American guns roared, guided by invisible numbers. To the Japanese crews, the attack seemed supernatural. Their lookouts scanned empty horizons as shells erupted around them. The destroyer, Akatsuki, pride of the Imperial fleet, vanished in a burst of fire before she could even launch a torpedo. Aboard Amatsukaze, Commander Hara watched the sea explode. His own torpedoes struck 2 American ships, the USS Barton and USS Juno. But when he turned his searchlight to confirm the kill, the darkness answered with vengeance. The Helena's radar-directed guns locked on instantly. 43 men died before Hara could order the lights out. 3 kilometers away, the battleship Hiei, veteran of Pearl Harbor, took 85 direct hits from ships she couldn't see. Her bridge shattered, her hull aflame. She became the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. The Imperial Navy's mastery of the night died with her. In the early months of World War II, the Japanese Navy had believed that courage and training could overcome numbers. But courage could not stop radar. technology had made bravery irrelevant. As reports reached Tokyo, disbelief turned to dread. Admirals who once preached the gospel of night warfare now whispered about ghost eyes. Yet the Americans knew the truth. Those eyes had names, addresses, and paychecks. They were the engineers at the MIT Radiation Laboratory, the women in Detroit factories soldering magnetron tubes, the operators hunched over screens in the dark. While the Japanese blamed fate, the Americans were rewriting it. Each new radar set improved range and accuracy. Each new destroyer carried smarter systems, lighter antennas, faster computers. The USS Fletcher, the first of her class, became a floating laboratory of innovation. Her 5-inch .38 caliber guns, paired with the Mark 37 fire control director, could strike targets beyond 10 miles, even through fog or storm. In 1 year, the U.S. Navy moved from guesswork to God's eye precision. The Imperial Navy, bound by tradition and divided by inter-service rivalry, failed to adapt. They had developed the same magnetron technology years earlier, but dismissed its value. Their scientists were ignored, their innovations buried under hierarchy. The result was a war fought in 2 centuries at once, one with eyes, the other with instruments. The turning point came again in November of 1943 at the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill's Task Force 39, several cruisers and Fletcher-class destroyers equipped with the latest SG radars, intercepted a superior Japanese force under Admiral Sentaro Omori. At 02:27 hours, radar contact was confirmed at 35,000 yards. For the next hours, the Americans tracked the enemy like hunters tracing heat in the dark. Japanese observers described it later as fighting ghosts. The Americans maneuvered flawlessly, firing first, striking true, retreating before being seen. Shells landed with surgical precision. Torpedoes found their marks guided by data, not eyesight. Despite having more ships, Omori's fleet was crushed. His flagship fled, leaving burning hulls behind. By mid-1943, Japan's Tokyo Express, the elite destroyer squadrons that raced by night to resupply Guadalcanal, was being slaughtered on every run. Radar-equipped American ships intercepted them in storms, in squalls, even through rain so dense that visibility fell to 0. The result was always the same. The Americans fired first. The Japanese never saw where death came from. The climax came off Cape St. George on November 25, 1943. Captain Arleigh Burke, commanding Destroyer Squadron 23, nicknamed the Little Beavers, faced 5 Japanese destroyers in total darkness. Burke's men fought entirely by radar plot. They never saw the enemy. Not once. Yet they sank 3 Japanese ships, Onami, Makinami, and Yugiri, without a single American casualty. When Burke wrote his after-action report, it read like a statement from another world. Entire engagement conducted by radar. Visual contact never achieved, nor required. The Japanese Navy that once ruled the night now feared it. Orders from Combined Fleet Headquarters began to forbid night engagements altogether. The darkness had become a trap, not a weapon. But the psychological collapse was deeper than statistics. Men who had spent years perfecting their eyes now found them useless. Their teachers, their heroes, their entire code of honor, invalidated by a blinking light on a screen. As one officer wrote later, "Our courage was pure, but the enemy's science was merciless." The night that once protected Japan's warriors now exposed them, and for the first time, the Imperial Navy understood what it meant to fight an enemy who could see without seeing. By early 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy faced a truth it could no longer deny. Its eyes had gone blind. The same night that once protected its ships had become their tomb. Radar had turned the unseen into the inevitable. From the halls of the Naval War College in Tokyo came desperate memoranda. Admirals proposed blind launch doctrines, firing torpedoes based on calculations rather than sight. Others demanded new countermeasures, deception papers, metal chaff, false echoes. None worked. The American SG radar cut through every illusion. It saw through storm, smoke, and hope alike. Japan's scientists, many of them brilliant, were trapped by the system they served. Dr. Hidetsugu Yagi, whose antenna design could have guided their own radar revolution, was ignored by his own military. When Japanese troops captured British radar sets using his very design, they failed to realize the Yagi name came from a countryman they had sidelined. Pride blinded progress as surely as darkness once did. Meanwhile, in America, a different kind of army was winning the invisible war. The MIT Radiation Laboratory had grown to 4,000 minds, mathematicians, engineers, even poets turned physicists, united by one purpose: to give vision to those at sea. Western Electric, Westinghouse, and General Electric built magnetron tubes by the hundreds of thousands. Women calibrated them by hand, their fingerprints marking the birth of electronic warfare. Every radar set installed on a destroyer meant fewer letters that began with, "We regret to inform you." Every flicker of green light on a screen meant another sun might come home. As radar spread across the fleet, the balance of the Pacific tilted beyond recovery. Japan's Type 22 radar, heavy, unreliable, and crude, could detect a destroyer at 10 nautical miles, if it worked at all. America's SG radar detected the same ship at 15 miles in any weather with pinpoint accuracy. The difference wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. The Americans trusted numbers, the Japanese trusted eyes, and in World War II, trust decided survival. By 1944, the gap had become unbridgeable. The United States had produced more than 100,000 radar sets of all kinds. Japan, barely 300. Even the heart of the technology, the cavity magnetron, was beyond Japan's ability to mass produce. The empire that had built the world's finest optics had no electronics industry to match. The consequences rippled across every front. The Tokyo Express runs, those daring, high-speed destroyer missions once famed for their precision, now ended in slaughter. Submarines that surfaced at night to recharge batteries were detected before they could dive. The USS England, a single American destroyer escort, sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days, all located first by radar. To Japanese sailors, it felt like magic. To Americans, it was mathematics. But technology alone does not tell the whole story. The collapse of Japan's night warfare revealed something deeper: the death of an idea. For decades, the Japanese military had built its identity on the Bushido Code, the belief that spiritual strength could conquer material weakness. Radar shattered that faith. No amount of courage could defeat a weapon that denied engagement itself. When the enemy can strike from beyond your senses, valor becomes sacrifice without meaning. In mess halls and wardrooms, young officers whispered what older ones feared to admit: that the gods had abandoned the night. Some wrote in diaries that they felt like archers in a thunderstorm, brave but blind, courageous but doomed. Back in the United States, newspapers barely mentioned radar. The public knew little of the science behind victory. But inside shipyards, workers understood. They had watched entire factories converted to electronics overnight. They had seen how science had become salvation. In their calloused hands, the war's most powerful weapon had taken shape not out of hatred, but out of the simple human desire to survive. When the final battles came, at Vella Gulf, at Cape St. George, at Leyte Gulf, Japan's surface fleet was no longer a fighting force. It was a tragedy in motion. Their commanders ordered night attacks knowing they would not return. They sailed into darkness, armed with faith against frequency, with eyes against electricity. By 1945, of the 70 modern destroyers Japan had possessed at the start of the war, barely a dozen remained operational. The rest lay silent beneath the Pacific, iron memorials to a vanished era. Historians would later call it the end of the warrior's night. Technology had not only changed warfare, it had rewritten the very terms of courage. But within that loss lay a quiet redemption. In the laboratories that built the radar, and on the decks that carried it, a new idea of heroism was born, one rooted not in destruction, but in preservation. When the guns finally fell silent, radar's pulse continued. It became a tool of peace, guiding ships through storms, airplanes through fog, rescuers toward survivors. The same light that once revealed enemies now revealed the path home. So when we remember those nights in the Pacific, we remember more than battles. We remember the moment when humankind learned to see the unseen, not to kill, but to endure. The Imperial Navy had entered the war believing the night was its ally. It ended the war learning that true vision belongs to those who share it. And as dawn rose over a sea littered with silence, the world awoke to a new truth. That power without understanding is blindness, and that knowledge, even born in war, can light the way to peace. When the guns fell silent, the seas of the Pacific still glowed, with the faint echoes of radar screens. For years, those circles of green light had guided men through terror and triumph. They had revealed enemies, saved convoys, and turned darkness into day. Yet, long after the warships rusted away, their true legacy remained, a legacy not of conquest, but of clarity. World War II was not only a contest of armies, it was a test of vision, a struggle between those who clung to the past and those who dared to see beyond it. The Japanese Imperial Navy had built its faith on courage, ritual, and precision born of discipline. The United States Navy placed its faith in learning, cooperation, and invention. When those two beliefs collided in the black waters of Guadalcanal, it was not hatred that decided the outcome, but understanding. Technology had become humanity's mirror. In its reflection, we saw both the power to destroy and the wisdom to protect. Radar, born from fear, became a language of light, one that spoke of how knowledge could save more lives than courage alone ever could. In the quiet aftermath, men who once fought each other came to respect what their enemies had achieved. Japanese officers, writing after the surrender, admitted that radar had rewritten the laws of naval combat. American sailors, in turn, spoke of admiration for those who had faced impossible odds with dignity. The war had ended, but the lessons remained. In World War II, machines did not erase humanity. They exposed its contradictions. Every pulse of a magnetron carried both destruction and deliverance. Every line of code and cable wire carried the fingerprints of people, workers, who believed in something larger than victory. That is the paradox of progress. We build the tools to fight, then realize they can heal. The same radar that once found ships now finds lost planes, storm fronts, and survivors adrift at sea. The same technology that illuminated targets now illuminates paths home. And so, as we look back on World War II, we must ask ourselves what kind of sight we carry forward. Do we look for enemies in the dark, or for the light that can guide us together? History remembers those who could see first, but peace belongs to those who keep looking. If this story moved something within you, if it reminded you of what courage once meant, then share it. Speak for those who can no longer speak. Because the fight for peace to guard the truth and preserve the light, never truly ends. The night that once belonged to warriors now belongs to us, to the generations who inherited their lesson. That vision, guided by conscience, is the truest weapon of all.